in terms of what we're going to cover over the next half an hour, 40 minutes or so, I'm going to just very briefly give you a very brief history of Funder Plus, setting it in its current context, if you like. Then I'll go on to talk about what we sort of come to understand by Funder Plus, or what it's become today in its application by funders and its use or receipt by organisations, grantees and the like. I'm then going to hand over to Maddie, who will take you into a much more practical part of the session around how funders go about supporting grant applicants and funded organisations. We'll talk about the different elements of capacity building that Funder Plus initiatives tend to support, show you a couple of tools. Michael will introduce you particularly to something that Rocket Science has developed and improved upon over the years, which is our organizational strengths review, a kind of diagnostic toolkit which is freely available and I think quite intuitive. But again, it'd be interesting to see what colleagues think of that. And then finally, we'll come back to me for a wrap up on a few thoughts about, there's no right or wrong answer here, or this is purely my own thinking at the moment, where we go next with Funder Plus, given the challenges the sector is constantly facing and having to manage. So it's quite a big agenda for this afternoon. Hope that is what you're expecting, and we'll rattle through and hopefully leave decent time at the end for some Q&A. So thank you, Michael. So a very brief history of Funder Plus. Essentially what we're talking about here is drawing on, I would say, at least a decade now of practice and learning from a range of funders that have gone into this area of work, and it's broadly under this label of Funder Plus, sometimes referred to Funding Plus or variations of that. I suppose one of the funders that is almost synonymous with Funder Plus, or for initiating and developing it over the years, is the Lloyds Bank Foundation, which have been at it, so to speak, since 2014. So definitely over a decade now. And it's worth, I in the next slide will reference a piece of work that Lloyds Bank Foundation did 5 years ago now, which was reflecting on 5 years activity of Funder Plus and what lessons they have drawn from that, and that's worth having a look at. But we'll have a look at that this afternoon as well. Others, and these are just three of many. Esme Fairbairn is another sizable funder which has a significant Funder Plus program, and a Funder Plus manager who actually has a separate dedicated role aside from the fund managers and grants officers that make up that foundation, whose role is to sort of broker, facilitate, evaluate the considerable investment, I think £1 million a year or more, that Esme Fairbairn put into their Funder Plus programming. And then it would be remiss of me not to include the City Bridge Trust, which is now the City Bridge Foundation, which developed and is evolving a program which it calls the Bridge Program, which is its iteration of Funder Plus, essentially providing expertise, support, capacity building initiatives, which grantees can access in addition to their funding. So we'll draw on lessons from all these over the next few minutes or so. The next bullet point really is to stress that I think it's important to consider Funder Plus against the backdrop or the context in which it has developed over the last 10 years or so. And three things in particular stand out, which I think are relevant to Funder Plus and the capacity of the sector to continue to deliver essential services, etc. Austerity, obviously, a decade or more of austerity during the 2010s, um, certainly was a driver. COVID towards the end of the decade and into the 2020s, and clearly the ongoing cost of living crisis. Um, these are all factors, I think, that have encouraged the funding community to think how they can make money go further, how can they help sustain civil society sector organisations when funding is increasingly tight and increasingly restricted, if you like. So that's worth bearing in mind as a context. And the context is shifting and changing as well, which we will come back to at the end of this presentation. And I think it's important to think about where Funder Plus goes next, given where civil society is going. Um, Broadly speaking, I think what Funder Plus has contributed to over the last decade or so is this cultural shift in the way increasingly funders now have moved from being transactional in making their grants to becoming much more relational. Now, these are sort of buzzwords and the element of jargon attached to them, but essentially what I think Funder Plus demonstrates is the intention of funders to get closer to their grantees and by implication to the issues and the communities that those grantees are supporting, working with, coming from, so that they get greater understanding of them, mutual understanding, mutual respect, and I think as a result become better funders in the long term. I think that's one of the objectives of this. Another thing to point out, or to comment on, I should say, is as a result of 10 years of this now or more, we have a considerable legacy of different models. We won't be able to go into anything like all of them today, but there's a legacy now of a range, a plethora, if you like, of different models of Funder Plus interventions, tools, toolkits, online, um, some of which we'll allude to today and demonstrate, and techniques. Now, I think on the plus side, that's a good thing. It's helped to support that capacity building that the sector craved for. But you do have to question also now, has it almost defeated the object in the sense that there are so many tools, toolkits, and the like out there that it becomes a challenge, a capacity issue about this capacity, the sector's ability to take advantage of them all. It's almost um, slightly it's come full circle. So you've got to question the capacity of the sector sometimes to absorb all the offers that are out there, and you almost need an offer to understand the offers, which is a bit bizarre. But anyway, I'll put that out there as to leave that as a question. And then finally, before I finish waffling on this afternoon, we'll think about where civil society is going mid 21st century and how Funder Plus needs to adapt to some of those developments and trends. So moving on, sorry, a bit long on that. So what do we understand by Funder Plus? Essentially, it's about those things I've listed on the bullets there, making the money go further, going beyond money by investing in organizational capacity, resilience, and its sustainability. So that short life project related funding can be more long lasting. It can have a wider impact than just supporting a project or an organization to deliver a service. Um, it also relates to the fact that there's a lot of churn and memory loss in the sector. So how does this kind of investment create a lasting legacy that lasts beyond the individuals who make up sector organisations? The That document is the one that um, image on the right there, 5 years of Funder Plus, is the front piece of the Lloyds Bank evaluation, and that goes into some detail about what they've learned. Um, I think one of the ones we'll come back to when Michael picks up in a few moments is the importance of diagnosis, understanding what the issues are that your organisation wants to address, and potentially use a Funder Plus offer to to make good. It's often interesting. I think this is something that's picked up in the Lloyds Bank experience and their reports, that the support that eventually is provided or taken up by individual organisations is often not what that recipient organisation felt was the problem they needed to fix in the first place. In other words, as a result of going through a diagnosis and a proper assessment of needs, they end up trying to fix something that is they hadn't thought was a problem in the first place. So yeah, that's just an interesting outcome from some of the funding investment that's gone into this over the years. And just another issue to just bear in mind that is possibly not a critique of Funder Plus, but a warning, I suppose, is for funders particular, is the danger of their displacing some of the infrastructure, the sector infrastructure, the CVSs, the councils of voluntary service, which have traditionally provided this sort of support. Funders need to be careful they're not muscling in or displacing that sector or that part of the sector as a result of wanting to extend their funding into the Funder Plus arena. So just some thoughts about context, about what we understand about Funder Plus. And just finally, before I hand over to Maddie, just a few key principles or tenets of the Funder Plus environment or system, if you like. First of all, the importance of it being voluntary. I think funders recognise they can't mandate this, nor should it be mandated. Going back to this issue of it being a relational, mutually beneficial investment, this really has to come, the demand has to come from the sector. Another principle I think at stake here is the fact that, excuse me, the Funder Plus support should be tailored and customized to the individual organisation. Relates to the issue that it should be demand-led, not supply-driven. That it can be as funders, you should expect organisations to shape what they need based on their own requirements, and not be have just to deal with what's coming off the shelf. And then finally, in terms of principle, I think funders should be reluctant or to require much of the recipients of Funder Plus in terms of reporting back or evaluating what they're doing. This is about giving them the space, the freedom, the means to address issues, organizational development challenges, and not expect to have to measure the impact of it or to report back and add to the bureaucracy and the burden. So those are just some basic tenets and principles that, again, we've come up picked up again from the 10 years experience of this. So less of the theory, more of the practice. I'm going to hand over to Maddie to take us into the next phase. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks there, John. Yeah, so as we sort of said right at the beginning, at Rocket Science, we do lots of work supporting organisations that are sort of fund and grant holders, whether that's directly through sort of monitoring or managing funding models, or whether that's through our kind of work with other clients sort of on the other end of developing strategies, evaluating work. And what we've kind of realised is there's sort of four key things that can be very, very sort of relatively simple to do and might not actually take a lot of resources from your perspective, that really sort of help support organisations, or at least help open up the opportunities for you to give them sort of quite tailored support moving forwards. So the first one, and this is probably the kind of simplest, but the one that we see being overlooked very often, is just supporting organisations to connect and partner. So often when you're sort of advertising or kind of promoting a new grant opportunity or a new funding opportunity, you'll have a kind of supplier event, have people come along, tell them what it's all about. And increasingly, there is that sort of need to work together and systems kind of approaches, building on kind of capacity across the system, reducing duplication, all of these things that we really want to see. But a really, really key, easy way to do that is to just support organisations to actually connect. So whether that's getting them in a room where they can share contact details, whether that's just asking in advance, are you happy if your details are circulated around? building in 10 minutes, or asking people in the chat to say who they are and how they want to help. That already can just be a really, really, really useful way for you to get better applications through because they'll be working in partnership, but also for the organisations, even if they're not successful or they decide not to bid, they've still got something out of attending the session, and they're still able to kind of take that forwards, as they sort of grow as the organisation. The next one is for your actual sort of grant or fund holders, is mapping their needs and resources. So in a few minutes, Michael's going to show you a kind of example of a tool that you can use to do that. But effectively, this could also just be a relatively simple sort of needs and capacity survey, asking the skills they have, the skills they don't have, understanding perhaps the number of people that might need to be upskilled in certain areas as well. And it's just a little bit of sort of scoping out early on to understand, again, as John was saying, what that kind of tailored support could look like. Within that, there's going to be some really easy wins to support grantees. It could just be sending them to another website or another kind of organisation. It could be developing a quick and easy kind of webinar that answers all of their questions. But you might also want to consider how you can support unsuccessful applicants. So if you are doing a webinar or you are just sending some information via email, there's nothing stopping that going to a wider audience, or that going on your website and being a kind of more publicly visible sort of resource that exists sort of all of the time. So it's just thinking, you can give this kind of Funder Plus model to organisations that haven't been successful, and maybe that's going to help them upskill and become successful in future funding rounds. And then the final one is using partnerships with experts to deliver capacity building. So as an organisation, I mean, you might, if you're particularly large, you might have all of the internal expertise to be able to deliver Funder Plus sort of resources and training, but you probably don't. So it's identifying who else is around that can help work with. It's, again, as John was saying about the sort of Lloyd's findings, it's about kind of partnering up and being relational. But if you're also mapping your organisation's resources and needs, there's maybe something around mapping their strengths as well and understanding where you can build in sort of peer support. So again, it doesn't have to be external people coming in necessarily. It can be experts within the kind of funding pool that you're working on. And then when it comes to capacity building, which I think is probably the most kind of obvious way that you can provide Funder Plus support, we've sort of identified 4 main ways that you want to do it. And then on the next slide, I'll go to even more practical kind of themes and topics that we repeatedly see being asked, where people need that extra support. So the first one is just doing that diagnostic review. It's understanding exactly what the problems are. It's using simple tools such as RAG rating or kind of heat maps to really just understand for both individual organisations and across the cohort where can that support exist. It's about having a balance between one-to-one and one-to-many support. So one-to-one allows you to be tailored, but if you've done that diagnostic review and you've highlighted over the heat map that there's 20 or 30 organisations all have this problem, then why not have a sort of 2-hour workshop, which is more engaging maybe than just a webinar, and think about giving a sort of one-to-many support approach. Again, it's access to experts and resources. So you may well have resources on a sort of learning management system that people get access to as a fundee. But again, you might want to consider if they can have them as a non-successful applicant as well. And then I think what we're seeing more sort of recently over the last 5 years or so is actually, again, really recognising that the people that you're funding themselves bring expertise and knowledge. And it's maybe about setting up an action learning approach, whether that's through a sort of community of practice or learning, or through you kind of collating learning and then sharing it back out on a regular and ongoing basis. I think a non-Funder Plus model would probably still do this, but it would do it right at the end and be quite retrospective. But to be Funder Plus, it's thinking about an ongoing basis, how you can support people moving through. So these are kind of some of the ideas. I guess the other thing there is just in terms of access to experts and resources. You may be aware, but there's certain organisations that, resources includes access to an office space and a shared building where you're also, again, meeting other sort of small grantees. And again, that kind of community of practice or learning maybe becomes less formal in that it's not regular meetings, but people are just getting it from the day-to-day kind of engaging people within a building and having that sort of workspace. and access to high-speed internet and all of the things that comes with nice shiny offices. So there's many different ways you can do it, and as I say, some kind of range from the cheap and cheerful to the more sort of substantial financial investments. So these kind of 8 areas are over the past sort of 5, 10 years what rocket science have again and again sort of seen as coming from support requests from VCSE and sort of public sector organisations that are likely to be recipients of the types of grants and funds that you might have. So a really big one is around evaluation, learning and monitoring. And this is particularly the case if you've stipulated the need for any of these three things within the kind of grant fund. So it's great to be doing evaluation and monitoring, but if the organisations don't have the capacity or the capability to do it, then you're going to get bad data and it's not going to be that useful. So it's something that will help you as well. And it can be quite simple from developing simple kind of monitoring forms and tools and then providing sort of upskilling sessions that people can fill them out. Or it can also be given them sort of much more tailored and kind of higher level information around different types of evaluation, developing theories of changes, whatever it might be. So it's just thinking again from that diagnostic review and from what the fund's about, how can you really help? A key part of that is social value tracking. So I'm sure you've all heard the term social value, and the last session we did sort of 10 minutes on that as well. So when Michael sends around the slides, feel free to go back and watch that from a couple of weeks ago. But again, increasingly we want to understand what the social return on investment or the social value of project is. But for a lot of small organisations, that's quite an unknown term and they don't really know how to do it. And really all it is setting up a kind of monitoring system in a way that's tracking social value. But if people don't have that knowledge and that confidence, they find it very, very hard to do. So again, that could be from setting up a kind of clear monitoring form or some sort of form or survey to kind of more theoretical training around what it is and how they can do it. The next one that we see again and again is around communications and legacy building. So again, particularly smaller organisations, they may not have any sort of communications or marketing expertise. They're doing incredible work, but they don't know how to shout about it. They don't know how to let other people know that it's happening. And that in turn prevents them from sort of really leaving a legacy as well. Obviously, as a funder, you want the organisations you funded to be able to shout about how good the fund was. And again, this can kind of build in further legacy for yourself. So, you know, workshops on storyboarding, on developing communication strategies can be really, really valuable and is usually something you can do in a one-to-many approach, although you might want to follow up with sort of shorter 15, 20-minute one-to-one chats as well. Governance, due diligence, all of those things, again, people might have challenges or uncertainties around it. And again, providing sort of dedicated support. In this sense, it may be a briefer overview, but actually probably you're going to have one-to-one support there. And this could even involve, along with sort of data protection ethics, putting people in touch or giving them sort of finance towards legal advice and legal support to make sure that they're setting things up in a way that is kind of robust and legal, which again is going to be important for you as a funder, sort of reducing your risks, but it will help these organisations on a much longer term than just the kind of specific fund they're working for, and it gives them that kind of longer term expertise that they can use to shape their work elsewhere. A big one is that ongoing fundraising. So again, when it's smaller organisations that may be living almost hand to mouth, helping them be more efficient and effective in their fundraising is really, really important. As funders, you should be pretty expert in knowing what funders look for and kind of how they can be more successful in applications. And in some cases, it can also be, you know, coming towards the end of a funding programme that you get sort of reviewing teams to support people with applications for elsewhere as well. And it can be really quite practical to, again, be more about information and dissemination. Mentioned briefly data protection ethics, but again, I think data protection is really, really, really tricky for a lot of different organisations, particularly where we are working in sort of social research areas, as is sort of research ethics and understanding, you know, when it's right to share information, when it's not. You'll find these organizations are experts at safeguarding, but when it comes to data protection and data sharing, that is quite tricky. So again, it can be some sort of dedicated legal advice. It could be templates for data sharing and data protection agreements. And it's just thinking again from the organizational diagnostics you do, where are the gaps? What is your fund asking people to do? And how can you really help them get it right? A really, really big one, and probably what's sort of sprung to your head early on when you saw the call for this session today, is volunteer training. So where organisations don't just have sort of paid staff members, but there's volunteers doing work as well. It can be useful to sort of provide them with volunteer onboarding. Again, this would be something you could technically do, 10 volunteers per organisation and have a big event, bring people together, do it online, whatever it might be. But really, really thinking about how you can provide extra skills to sort of individuals. And then finally, it's in sort of more methods, and this could come back to evaluation, but it can also help people in project design, understanding how they want to sort of co-design and work with the people that they're engaging. So peer engagement, peer research is often really important, and again, is something that you could either train organizations how to do peer research, or you could bring in an expert that trains up peer researchers across the organizations and kind of mobilizes them to help the organizations. So there's many, many different ways you can do that. And it always, is down to sort of resources, funding, but really down to that organizational review. Where things don't come up as a big major problem, then maybe it's more of your one-to-many support. Where there's a lot of inconsistency and things keep coming up again, that might be where you want to sort of place more resources. So as John said at the beginning, it's going to be tailored differently for every single kind of funding model that you have. I'm just going to pass over to Michael, who's going to go through the organisational strength review.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, this is a free tool that we've built, which is called an organizational strengths review. It's an Excel-based diagnostic tool, and it allows organizations to plot their strengths and weaknesses across a range of different areas, which you can see on the tabs at the bottom. So these cut across areas such as like governance, human resources, finance, technology, values, and communication. And through a range of statements, organizations will score themselves between strongly disagree through to strongly agree. And what that's doing is, if you go to the next slide quickly, Maddie, the next slide is sort of showing a summary of all of these sort of scores. It will take all of those statements and then sort of provide like a spider diagram with the results. And we know that sometimes it may appear that a weakness or an area to strengthen may be one particular area, and that may not necessarily be the case, because it's around perception, it's around how people are seeing the challenges within the organization. But it can help with discussions, particularly if you're using an external consultant or someone to come in. It's a good sort of tool really to use as a basis to understand where the organization is seeing itself, and enable those discussions to take place. It can also help with trying to sort of plot yourself as well. So looking at distance traveled. So if you were providing as a funder capacity building support, then an organization could complete this at the beginning before the support starts and then complete it at the end. And then you can do a comparison to sort of see, how that capacity building really helped the organization to move on. It is a free tool, and what you can do on these slides when they're shared, on the bottom right, there is a download button. So you can click on that, download it as an Excel document, and use that for yourself or for your grantees, or for your own reference. But that's a free tool that we provide, which is useful for any sort of organization really.
Back to you, John.
Sorry, I muted myself because I've got a cough at the moment. So yeah, thanks both. Thanks, Maddie. Thanks, Michael. So this is just a final sort of few thoughts about where we go next with Funder Plus. Not that it's disappearing or exiting the sort of lexicon of funders and grant making. It's very much still very present, but I think, as with all programs and initiatives, it is constantly evolving. And just been thinking about how it might evolve as we go into the sort of middle of the 21st century, when, given the fact that this has been around for a decade or more already. So just a few thoughts, and be really encourage anyone to add their own views and comments on the chat or in the discussion at the end of this presentation. I think quite a significant thing that's come onto um, come over the horizon this year has been the publication by the government of the Civil Society Covenant. I'd be interested to know how many colleagues in the room, in the chat room today, have familiarized themselves with the covenant, have seen it already in use. It's been around now since the summer. We've certainly been using it in some of the work we've been doing with a couple of clients, particularly local authorities, which are thinking about how they reframe their relationship with their civil society on a local place basis. And the Civil Society Covenant is essentially an update, I believe, of what used to be called the Compact. It sets the broad principles or foundations, pillars, however you want to describe them, of the relationship between the statutory sector and local civil society. And those pillars are recognition, mutual recognition, not just recognition being one way. What shapes the mutual recognition of the way that the different sectors engage, interact, support each other in tackling some of the social challenges of today, which are many. The second element or foundation in the covenant is around partnership working. There's a demand potentially for Funder Plus support to help smaller organisations and VCS organisations get the most out of partnerships. How do you maximise your involvement in partnership working when partnerships can be very demanding on your time and resources as a small VCS organisation? The third element is around participation. Maddie talked about the importance of volunteering and getting the most out of volunteers and social activism. So again, Funder Plus has a role to play there in supporting participation and maximising participation. And finally, I think almost the most important of all is the pillar or principle around transparency. There's a lot of suspicion around at the moment about what different organizations' motives are in various spheres of life. So transparency and openness and collaboration is in my view at least a very good thing. How do we ensure that we are clear about what our motives are when we're grant funding, when we're supporting organizations, when we're choosing to invest in a particular issue as opposed to another when resources are finite and tight. So I think Funder Plus probably needs to adapt or show how it can support the covenant. And I think we'll see the covenant becoming an increasingly used instrument to help get the most of the different sectors that make up our civil society. In a similar vein, we're obviously seeing over the last 10 years, particularly over the last 5 years since COVID, increasing funder collaboration. I tend to work mainly in London, so apologies for those outside the capital. But we've seen through the good offices of London funders the development of something called the Propel Initiative, and now the Collaboration Circle, which is bringing together several big funders to actually pool their funds. So for me, a corollary of that could well be the development of a pooled or a shared Funder Plus offer, which has possibly a resonance with a particular city, London in this case, or Manchester or Leeds or other areas where funders have a shared place-based interest. If they're pooling their funding, could there be a pooling of Funder Plus programming? Question. And in that context, we're seeing increasing interest with the further and further devolutionary settlements, the rise of the city regions, the directly elected mayors, etc. and the recognition of the importance of anchor institutions, whether those be the local councils, FE institutions, NHS bodies, where they are fixed in place. How do we maximize those assets and resources to develop a funder plus support offer? You've got grant makers, you've got foundations, you've got philanthropists in place. How do you bring the assets of the other anchor bodies around those to complement the funding that is going into the sector? Again, an interesting challenge. Linked to that, I think, is the new public procurement legislation that has ensured that social value is rising up the agenda and becoming an increasingly important tool for statutory bodies, statutory funded organisations, to extract more from essentially private providers and suppliers. How do they articulate what they would like of suppliers in terms of giving their additional social value to particular places or particular issues? Can we articulate that requirement, that social value ask, in a way that it develops a funder plus element that could support go alongside grant making and funding investment? And then finally, over the past couple of years, we have seen what I call the rise of the social justice funder. So a number of big funders, City Bridge being one of them. Others have done this, Esme Fairbairn, I think, have been going through it, major reviews of their funding priorities. And we're seeing now the development of the so-called social justice funders that are really focusing in on some of the modern current social evils. To quote the sort of Beveridge original social evils that led to the foundation of the welfare state, what are the current social evils that we're having to really focus in on? Equality, diversity and inclusion, access to justice, environmental justice. These are big topics. How do we develop a funder plus offer around the investments that are going into those major social justice causes? We don't have the answers. Those are some questions we just wanted to put out there, because I think Funder Plus is here to stay, but it needs to go through its next iteration to remain really relevant and topical to face up to the current challenges.